Hello, everyone, and welcome to The Bill Brief, the podcast where we break down legislation, what it says, why it matters, and how it could shape our communities. I'm your host, DJ William, and today we're taking a closer look at H.R. 22, the Safeguard American Voter Eligibility Act, also known as the SAVE Act. This bill was introduced by Representative Chip Roy of Texas on January 3rd, 2025. As of now, this bill has passed House. So this bill is especially interesting to me because I think a little over a week ago, I actually heard it being discussed on the news when they were talking about how federal elections work, and they were discussing how to keep the integrity in these elections. One of the newscasters actually brought up this bill, and I was like, whoa, that's so cool. I should definitely look more into it, and I'm happy I did. So today, let's get into what the SAVE Act does, why it's being debated, and what it could mean for federal elections in the United States. Okay, so to understand what this bill actually does, there are 7 important things. I think it's great to break these things up, right? See exactly what would come about if this bill were to be passed. So the first thing that the SAVE Act does is it requires people to show documentary proof of their U.S. citizenship when registering to vote in federal elections. So this could include documents like a passport, a birth certificate, or even certain real ID that lists citizenship, that shows that you are a citizen of the United States. The second thing that this bill does is it confirms that states cannot register someone to vote unless that person shows proof of citizenship at the time they apply. This is super duper interesting, right? Because it has the power with the states, but it also shows that states must comply if this bill were to pass, right? So that's super duper important. The third thing is that states must create an alternative process for applicants who don't have the listed documents, but can still prove citizenship in other ways. And I love this part, right? Because it gives people a lot of leeway. It's saying that, if you don't have those listed documents, if maybe you don't have a passport or you don't have a birth certificate, there are still other ways you can prove citizenship. So it doesn't tie you down to just one thing. And that's what's so great about this bill. The fourth thing is that states must regularly check their voter list to make sure that only U.S. citizens are registered, and they have to use information from federal and state sources, right? So this basically keeps states accountable, making sure that they're checking their voter lists, making sure that everything is correct. The people who are supposed to be voting are voting, and anyone who is not a citizen should not be voting. That is super cool with this legislation. Okay, the sixth main thing you should know about what this bill does is that it allows private lawsuits against election officials who register someone without the required proof. So this is, again, all about accountability, right? It shows people that there is a consequence if you don't follow and you don't comply with this bill, right? If an election official registers someone who is not a U.S. citizen, then, there's going to be private lawsuits, and there's a whole process towards that. And a main thing is when you pass any piece of legislation, it needs to hold the people accountable, or otherwise, it doesn't actually do anything, really. Okay, and the last and most important thing that this bill does is that it actually creates new criminal penalties for officials who knowingly register an applicant who has not presented documentary proof of citizenship. Yeah. So that is so important, right? This is, again, I know I keep using this word, but it's again about accountability. Having these criminal penalties for officials who register an applicant that hasn't provided any proof, right? So this again holds those election officials responsible. Okay, so those are the main mechanics of that bill. let's get into the implications, right? These are the real effects of what would actually happen if this bill were to be passed. The first thing is that since it has stronger verification of voter eligibility, it would help prevent any accidental or intentional registration of non-citizens, right? And okay, this next thing I absolutely love and I want to explain it and get into more detail, but it gives states a uniform standard to follow, right? Because right now, states follow different verification systems. But this bill, it would create a consistent requirement for registering to vote in federal elections. This also makes the process a lot more clear for voters who are moving in between states or, they're a little bit unsure of the policy in each and every state. This bill keeps it the same, keeps it simple, keeps it short, and that's what it's all about. Okay. The second thing is that it actually increases public confidence in elections. This bill requires proof of citizenship, right? And because it does that, people may feel like more trust in the fairness of elections as a whole. This is because it would reduce fear of illegal voting. And it also helps reinforce the idea that every single ballot is legitimate. That is so significant in this context. Okay, and here's this other word again, but it gives election officials accountability, right? It holds them responsible for their actions. This bill, it allows lawsuits and penalties when officials ignore citizenship check rules knowingly, right? So what this would do when put into effect is it encourages careful and accurate registration, right? These officials would take their time making sure that these people really are citizens. And they will make sure that the process is taken seriously, right? They're not going to slack off, nothing like that. This bill will hold them accountable. Okay. The next thing is that it would possibly, this isn't a certain, but it definitely will help it get there, right? It would help deter attempts at voter fraud. Okay. Many supporters of this bill argue that stronger checks actually make it less likely that someone could intentionally try to register illegally. This would cause more difficult for ineligible individuals to just slip through and cast their vote. And it also strengthens the overall system. While, there's no confirmation that there's going to be no voter fraud at all if this bill were to pass, it definitely reduces voter fraud. And it makes it harder for individuals to even think about, oh, maybe I could cast my vote even though I'm not a citizen, right? It makes them think twice, which is super duper important. Okay. So now let's get into the more interesting part, right? The more debate part of it, the opposing arguments. So these opposing arguments are actually all based on what if scenarios, what if this happens or what if it makes it harder, all of that. So I think some of them are very strong and others are less strong, but it's important to get into all of them and really see why people don't think this would be a good bill to pass. And I am always open to understanding the other side of the argument, right? So opponents, they argue that it might make registration harder for citizens who don't have easy access to documents, such as, older adults, like the elderly, low-income Americans, or people born in rural areas without official hospital records for their birth certificate or something like that. Okay, now this clearly goes against what the bill actually says, right? The bill says that if someone does not have these documents, they will allow other ways to prove that they are a U.S. citizen, right? So this completely goes against what the bill even does because, the people who wrote this bill, they know that there are going to be issues that someone might not have these documents. So they're allowing for an alternative way to do things and to get things done. So that is the clear argument against this opposing belief. Okay. The next thing that, people believe is a little controversial about this bill is they think that it would increase state workload, right? And this is not a certainty. We don't know that this would happen, right? They have this belief that states would need to continuously check voter rolls to identify potential non-citizens, and it could require some more administrative work and more verification systems, right? But that's these election officials' job. An election is such an important thing. We are deciding a leader, right? It's so integral, which is why it's okay if the process is a little slowed down, just to make sure that, the people who are voting actually should be voting. So that's okay. And this isn't even confirmed, right? I'm sure they would come up with a fast system. I mean, there's so much going on with AI, and all of that stuff is just growing, right? Lots of different verification systems. There could be more people hired to help out. There's a lot. So, that argument isn't even a certainty or justification for not passing this legislation. Okay. This third one, I'm in the middle here. Because in this bill, it states that, there would be lawsuits and election workers would be held liable if they don't comply, and that they could be sued privately or even charged criminally for mistakes, right? Now, critics say that this could potentially discourage people from even wanting to work elections. And this is actually, I didn't know this, but it's a role that many states already struggle to find staff for. And it's so important to have election officials, right? Because we need people managing the votes and helping the election run smoothly. And I could see how this discourages people, but I feel like there's no other way to do it. People need to be held accountable to make sure that all the processes are being followed, right? There's always going to be consequences when you're in a job. So I think it's okay. But I'm sure that there would definitely be some leeway here, because there's already leeway in this bill. So I'm sure that there would be something if, there was a little mishap or a little error. I'm sure, it's not just going to be, oh, hey, here's a lawsuit and you're going to be sued and all of that. So that's also not a definitive this will happen. So I hope it doesn't discourage people from working elections, but seeing all the benefits that this bill would bring, I don't think of this is okay, this is why we shouldn't have this bill passed. Okay. And this next one, this last counter argument to this bill also interests me, right? It gets me thinking. It's not like an immediate, oh, this counter argument doesn't make sense, right? It gets me thinking. It's like, maybe this could happen. Opposers also believe that stricter requirements may change who is able to register, and that since there's registration barriers, they have been shown to reduce voter turnout, especially for young voters and first-time voters, right? So someone who is 18 years old, knowing that, okay, they need to find their passport, they need to get their birth certificate, they need to get all of that ready, especially if they're not really into the election, they might be like, I'm not really wanting to do this, and it might put them off a little bit. And even for other people, right, they may, and this is all a maybe, potentially think that this makes the process harder, so they might not want to even vote. But that's crazy, right? That's just because, okay, they're asking for a little more documents, so we're gonna have so much, reduced voters. I mean, that's a crazy thought, right? It's like a logical fallacy. So, that definitely takes it to an extreme. I'm not saying that it could never happen. There definitely is a maybe there, but again, it's a maybe. And we know that if we do pass this bill, there are so many definitive benefits. Like, yes, this will happen, and it's so good for our country at this time. So that's really important. So lastly, to end everything off, why this matters. This bill matters because voting is one of the most important rights in a democracy. Any change to who can register and how affects participation. It affects the election administration, and it also might affect trust in the process as well. The SAVE Act raises some really important questions about access, security, and the balance between preventing illegal voting and also even ensuring that every citizen can easily participate. So it's super, super significant to our country at this time. But yeah, I'm so happy to have discussed this bill. And that's it for today's episode. So thank you all for listening and see you next time.